Welcome to another episode of Grief Heals, the podcast where we explore how it is that grief heals us with our relationship with ourselves, with one another, and our whole wide world. I am your host, Lisa Michelle Zega, and I am excited to have another conversation. Every time I come here, I start with a It's just funny to me. I don't know what that's about, but I notice that I do that regularly. And maybe, well, who knows? Hello. How about that? And yeah, just good to be with you again and breathing in our togetherness. And speaking of togetherness, I have just been thinking so much about the interconnectedness and the interdependence of all beings. And I've been thinking in terms of ecosystems and how we ourselves as people are like a universe within a universe, or another way of saying that, an ecosystem within an ecosystem. Like, it's just crazy to me. So I actually was thinking about, well, what even is an ecosystem? And so this is what ChatGPT had to say. It's a dynamic, interconnected system of living and non-living components that interact to create balance, sustain life, and adapt to change. And I was thinking about the ecosystem like within our emotions, and then that dependent upon every other system within ourselves, like our internal systems, such as our nervous system, our digestive system, our, oh guy, help me out, because all of a sudden my mind went blank. But that all the different moving parts within our cellular system, would you say it that way? Within a human being, the systems within us, and then the systems that we are connected to within one another, within nature, and like, I'm thinking of this almost like concentric circles going out and out and out. And this idea that everything is interrelated, it's connected, and in some way dependent on the systems that it's connected to. And then also the way, because it's all connected, the way we as individuals relate to and connect to and impact the environments around us, including our whole biological universe within us. What does that have to do with anything? Well, I've specifically been thinking about this in relationship to grief. Like, okay, wait a minute. We tend to think of grief as like this one type of emotion, this one way of interacting within ourselves. And then I was thinking about, well, also the way society as a whole and our surrounding society thinks about grief is also something that we are absorbing as individuals, right? That impacts how we're thinking about grief and interacting with it. And I was thinking about how, well, if grief is somehow thought of as like bad or wrong or something that's not supposed to be here, and then it gets sort of pushed away and isolated, how that impacts the individual, and then how that feeds back into the loop of connecting to society as a whole. And then in the realm of emotional sensations, may I say sensations, I was like, well, it's kind of like, I didn't finish my sentence, so let me try to do that. Thinking about, well, if I treat grief as independent of my joy, as independent of my compassion, as independent of my anger, and yet all of these emotions are interconnected. And I've been looking a lot into the way that the brain develops for work that I'm doing in organizations around working with people in instability, and the environment in which a brain is developing is highly informative to how said brain develops, right? So starting with the brain stem itself, and depending on how stable the environment that brain stem is being developed, right? So the stability within the woman that the child is growing inside, and how that impacts the development of the brain stem, and then the limbic system and the midbrain, and it's just crazy to me. And yet each layer of the brain's development is also dependent upon what grows, is layered upon it. It's just fascinating to me. It's fascinating to me how, how people will talk about a self-made person. I mean, it's so ridiculous. I mean, there literally is no such thing. That it's like an impossible impossibility. Because that self-made person, even arriving to where they are in life, just being born, is dependent on so much of what comes before them, and then how the brain and body develop, and all the interdependency, and how nature plays a role. And it's just making me think about, how I started, the interdependence and the influence of systems upon one another. Just last night, I had a friend share with me a diagnosis that she received, and she said, I just don't mean to be a bummer in this time of celebration. And how does thinking of ourselves as interdependent, and our body systems as dependent on one another, and us depending on a larger ecosystem, impact even a statement like that? I mean, being a bummer in a time of celebration. Like, I would just ask, is that a bummer? Is it a bummer to have intimacy? To have a sense of knowing and connection of what is happening with those that we love? And then how does receiving compassion or care impact another person and their own well-being? And how does feeling isolated and alone, like I can't say what's true for me, impact our sense of healing or wholeness? And is that what we want? Like, just think about this. It is what you want for others, that they would be isolated and alone in their times of challenge and difficulty? Because if we don't want that for those we love, why would we want that for ourselves? And when we treat ourselves like we do those we love, how does that impact the whole ecosystem? It's making me think, have you ever heard of this study? There was a biosphere developed, I want to say it was at the Arizona State University, and they were studying, like, what's it like to create a perfect biosphere to grow trees? And all the conditions in the environment were, ideal. except for the trees would only reach a certain height and then they wouldn't continue to grow. And this mystified those that were part of this collective project, because they thought they had all the conditions, like thought about to grow these trees to their full vigor, right? And what they discovered is they had not taken into account the impact of the wind and the necessity of the wind for the trees to fully develop. So by the tree experiencing the resistance of the wind, what happened was the tree's roots needed to go down and out, right? The tree's roots extended in response to the wind. The tree's bark actually toughened in response to the wind so that it could absorb more and grow to a greater stature. It makes me think of my own, like a muscular system, your muscular system, like that resistance is needed. It's actually part of the requirement for my muscles to reach their capacity of development. I experience strain in my muscles beyond what the muscle can handle at a given time. And then the muscle, no longer like is able to lift or hold the weight, let's say, the resistance. And so the muscle collapses and it finds rest. And in that resting process, it regenerates. And here's the mystery: it grows beyond its original capacity. And like this cycle continues. And then thinking about that in nature, right? Like every year, the nature around us goes through a dying and a rebirth, right? Like this is what we call winter and spring. And the seasons in between this process. And what does all of this get to teach us about grief? Like right now, and maybe it's because the tree behind me, but you notice the various colors on the tree. And even in the season of fall, you notice these different colors. And you know what it's like watching the leaves turn. I mean, that's the season we're in, where we can still see the green of summer, and we see the orange, and we see the yellows, and we see the browns as the trees begin to let their leaves vacate, right? Preparing for winter. And this overlap of seasons where we see multiple colors, multiple seasons on a tree at a given time. And thinking about the complexity of emotions and the conflicting emotions. Someone just reached out to me talking about the holiday season, and this being the first holiday season without her husband, and all the conflicting emotions arising. And it's okay on the tree, right? It's okay. And we don't look at a tree that has some of the green and the orange and the brown and say, hey, what's wrong with you? That can't all coexist at this time. No, we tend to just kind of know that there's a process and there's a cycle and there is a death and there is a life. This morning, I went to church, and I don't sit comfortable in church these days. And that's okay, right? Like I was considering some of the songs. And one of the songs, it was like a modern version of Amazing Grace. And it said, I once was lost and now I'm found. And it was just like this speaking that spoke to permanence of some sort, that didn't take into consideration in my mind the cycles, the process. And I was just sitting there and contemplating that and thinking, wow, but I am continually lost, and I am continually found, and I am continually blind and continually seeing. And there's so many cycles working at once. at different stages. And again, this just speaks to me of this interdependence and thinking about the way that nature regenerates itself and thinking about what happens and the complex systems and the network of life, right, that are informing an ecosystem's health. And so I remember there was a season of my life where I did CrossFit. It was the most athletic I had ever been in my life. And as I began to build muscle and strength in a way that I'd never known strength within my body before, other areas of my life got stronger. I began to say things that I had not let myself say before that. I began to notice things in my own emotional world and get a level of honesty within myself, and stood up in ways that I had just not stood up before. And now thinking about that, like building strength in this area of my life, my muscles also helped me to build like an emotional strength, a mental fortitude. It's just fascinating to me to consider the connection within and the connection without. And it's helping me to get curious about how my actions impact the whole, and how the whole, like the interplay between the two, how much power there is as an individual. And yet we're never truly like, what am I trying to say? It's a misnomer. It's a misconception, I'm thinking, to even imagine that I could just exist as an isolated being. I cannot find that anywhere in the universe where there's such a thing. And maybe I just don't understand how it all works, right? Like I don't pretend to be a scientist, a philosopher, a theologian, like none of it. I'm this human who thinks a lot and feels a lot, connects with people, and I'm recognizing all these different ways that I learned to disconnect from myself and all the different layers of disconnection. I read something, it was a quote by Maya Angelou, and she said something to the effect, I don't have the quote in front of me, but like in her observation, not many people grow up. And she was like, well, they grow up in terms of their bodies become a certain, level of maturity, and they have children and they raise children, but that's not necessarily like growing to the, I don't know, I don't have the quote in front of me, but here's the story I'm telling myself, the health and vibrancy and like the way that tree, right, that I talked about in that biosphere, like it grows to a certain height, but it's not able to withstand the elements, and that the elements are needed. It's wild to me. It's wild to me that I somehow imagined a life without struggle, trial, like as if that's the sort of life that would make me happy, because every person that I've ever known that feels rich and whole and comforting and lively, and like the people I love the most have experienced heartbreak, like where the heart is holding more than the heart can hold at the time, just like a muscle. Something breaks, there is a rest, the heart expands. And is it that there's a leaning into is that what it means to be conscious? Like, I am really just thinking about these things. Like, is that what it means? That we lean into the pain, that we lean into the wind? Because I'm experiencing some things, and I keep wanting to get out of the wind. And I keep feeling called to lean in to the wind and trust the resilience. There's a poem by Dane, I think his name is Dane Anthony. I want to say it's called Right Here. And that's what's coming up. The reason I'm saying that is because in his poem, it says, lean into the wind, trust the resilience. And he says, it would be treason to move too far to the right or to the left. And the call is to stand right here in this place, right here, right now. So, I don't know. I know when I don't know. I'm thinking, this is my consideration, my contemplation for this season of my life, is what it means to be interdependent, like a particle in the universe that plays a unique role in the universe and informs the whole while being informed by the whole. And the benefits of the wind and the struggle, and how it is that grief really does heal. Like, I guess, for me, grief isn't isolated. It's not like one thing. I say grief is love, but I think what that means to me is it's all that love contains. And as best I can tell, as best I can understand, love holds it all. Love allows it all. Yeah, it's just got, like, love is patient, and love is kind, and love rejoices in the good. Love brings it all together. I feel like I'm having some sort of death and resurrection experience right here, right now. Considering how this feels, exactly how this feels, how I got exactly where I am, and how I'm called to be here. And that all these little deaths and resurrections and leaning in is really leading to new life, not just for me, for us. I'm just gonna go. Gonna spend some time reflecting more on these things. And I will talk with you more about what I discover as I discover it. And until then, the wind is really picking up. How perfect is that? I hear the power of the wind. I'm putting my arms out. I invite you to do the same. And if not, just know that as I wrap my arms around me, I'm also wrapping my arms around you as we lean into the wind together and trust the resilience. All right, mwah. Bye-bye.
You've You've been listening to Grief Heals with Lisa Michelle Zega. The podcast is produced by me, Eric Simpson, in association with Jump Up and Down Productions. Music by Candelian, Drunken Nights to Sunday Mornings, and Stefan Carlin, A Calming Ocean, A Common Notion. If you would like more information about the work Lisa does, point your browsers to legityou.com. That's LEGITYOU. Lisa can also be reached at Lisa Michelle at legityou.com. This has been a Jump Up and Down production.